Approximately 3.8 billion years ago, a series of chemical reactions formed the first complex compound capable of self-replication. This marked the beginning of life on Earth. The origin of life on Earth, on the whole, remains a mystery. But ever since Charles Darwin first described the process of evolution in the plant and animal kingdoms, scientists have held the view that all life forms are in a state of constant and continuous development. With each new generation, strengths are honed and weaknesses are eliminated, revealing ever new possibilities. A single ancestral species could give rise to several life forms, after which it would either die out or find its own niche in the ecosystem that allowed it to survive and retain its original form, while its descendants fit perfectly into other niches. The result was a complex system of lineages connecting all organisms living on Earth today with their extinct ancestors. The ancient remains of many of these vanished species have been preserved as fossils. Before the emergence of life on Earth, the atmosphere contained chemicals such as methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and water. Chemical reactions took place in the seas. Sugar molecules combined to form starch and cellulose, and amino acids formed proteins. Sugars, together with nitrogenous compounds, formed DNA, a molecule capable of self-replication. Fossils can be found in sedimentary rocks, the age of which is determined using advanced methods of radioisotope dating. This has allowed scientists to reconstruct an approximate picture of life on Earth for any geological period. Approximate because only a small fraction of the remains from the entire diversity of plant and animal life that ever existed has been preserved. And yet, judging by the fossils found, one thing is clear. The system of lineages between existing and extinct organisms resembles a tree, on which new branches appear over time. Many of them dry up and die off, for example, the dinosaurs. But other branches grow and flourish. If we trace any of them back to its base, we will ultimately arrive at a single trunk, the progenitor of all organisms that have ever lived, that is, the source of life's origin. Traces in the rock. Unfortunately, this is not easy to do. According to modern estimates, the Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old, and the oldest fossils are believed to be no more than 590 million years old, which corresponds to the beginning of the so-called Cambrian geological period. Fossils found in Cambrian rocks include the remains of various life forms, such as worms and mollusks, which obviously descended from their primitive ancestors. In other words, they were somewhere in the middle of the evolutionary tree. Their origin in the era known as the Precambrian remains unclear due to the fact that no organic remains have been preserved in the rocks of this period. The reason for this is easy to explain. Soft-bodied organisms do not leave fossils, because upon dying, they usually decompose completely before the surrounding sediments turn into hard rock. It is likely that most organisms that lived in the Precambrian period, which constitutes 80% of Earth's entire history, were too fragile to leave clear deposits. But this does not mean they left no traces at all. In the early 1950s, two researchers began a detailed study of a 2-billion-year-old rock layer known as chert on the shores of Lake Superior, USA. The rock contained curious white rings, each about a meter in diameter. At first glance, there was nothing organic about them, but despite this, the scientists decided to examine small samples of the rings with a powerful microscope. A wonderful discovery. They discovered undeniable signs of ancient life. The remains of tiny organisms resembling microscopic single-celled algae and bacteria that thrive to this day. By some miracle, these fragile organisms were permeated with glassy silica, which hardened and turned into chert, where they were preserved like flies in amber. The white rings in the rock turned out to be the eroded remains of their colonies, stony spherical formations called stromatolites, which resemble coral reefs in tropical waters.
The discovery of samples containing organic remains was a breakthrough. Scientists all over the world resumed the study of rocks they had previously considered devoid of fossils. Their efforts were rewarded with astonishing results. The oldest life forms discovered to date in Western Australia are about 3.5 billion years old. Meanwhile, a thorough study of the oldest rocks known to us, the Amitsoq gneisses in southwestern Greenland, which are 3.8 billion years old, did not yield the expected results.
No miracles. Biologists find nothing surprising in the fact that the discovered primitive remains resemble modern algae and bacteria. Such single-celled organisms have always been considered the simplest forms of life, and it is quite natural that they are also its most primitive forms. Thanks to the simplicity of single-celled organisms, it is relatively easy to figure out their way of existence. Instead of studying the functioning of organs and muscles, biologists investigate how initial chemical substances are transformed into the building blocks of life: proteins, fats, and sugars. The simple cell. These studies are especially important for unraveling the mystery of the origin of life, as the following transformation must have taken place to initiate the entire process, from inorganic chemical substances to living matter. A bacterium, a self-sufficient, simple cell, is a gelatinous, fluid-filled envelope that processes simple chemical substances consisting of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen into complex organic compounds, proteins necessary for its growth, and carbohydrates, sugars, that give it energy. It is likely that lightning played a key role in the formation of the first organic substances. Other energy sources include heat from volcanoes and solar radiation. Stanley Miller used a similar apparatus to recreate the conditions characteristic of the primordial Earth. He proved that some of the basic compounds necessary for life could have formed from simple gases such as hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and water vapor as a result of heating and spark discharges. Other scientists have managed to synthesize a larger number of amino acids. The structure of DNA. Ultimately, these processes are controlled by an organic substance, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Furthermore, DNA has another important property: it can replicate itself. Each DNA molecule resembles a spiral staircase, where chains of atoms form the sides with rungs, or steps, located at regular intervals. If necessary, the entire molecule can split in two, with the steps separating in the middle. After the spiral splits, the shortened steps attract other substances, which attach to form the missing halves of the staircase. Thus, two spirals are created from one. This simple mechanism is the essence of life. Thanks to it, a single-celled organism grows and reproduces itself by splitting in the middle and copying its internal chemical process. In more complex life forms, reproducing cells collectively form multicellular structures, with each structure being just a part of an extremely complex organism. The entire process is governed by the genetic code embedded in the DNA molecule, which differs not only between species, but also among all individuals. Functions of DNA. All life processes, eating, drinking, excreting waste products, and so on, are mechanisms that serve to support the activity of DNA. DNA is a very complex molecule, and the more complex the life form, the more complex its DNA. But even the structure of the simplest DNA, in a bacterial cell, consists of thousands of atoms grouped into nucleotides, compounds of sugars, phosphates, and nitrogenous bases. Each nucleotide itself is also a fairly complex structure, and the same applies to other organic molecules such as proteins and carbohydrates. Thus, proteins consist of chains of amino acids. There are 20 different types in total, arranged in a specific sequence. A simple chain can consist of 100 links, while a complex one can have several thousand.
The entire structure is determined by the genetic code of the organism's DNA. The simplest bacterial cell contains proteins, carbohydrates, and DNA, and other similar nucleic acids, without which it cannot function. Since these cells are the most primitive form of life known today, the conclusion suggests itself that they arose from non-living structures that synthesized these essential elements of life even before they could find an organic use for them.
The primordial soup. No one knows what our world was like 3.8 billion years ago, but in the 1920s, scientists Oparin and Haldane proposed a theory that the Earth's atmosphere in those distant times was almost completely devoid of oxygen and consisted of ammonia, water, carbon monoxide, methane, hydrogen, and a number of other substances. They suggested that most of the Earth's surface was covered by a layer of hot water, its boiling sustained by magma, the molten rock beneath the thin oceanic crust. According to their hypothesis, such a mixture of gases and hot water could have led to the formation of a so-called primordial soup, rich in precisely those chemical elements necessary for the synthesis of life. The reaction could have been initiated by volcanic activity, intense ultraviolet radiation passing through the thin atmospheric layer, or the electrical discharge of lightning. This theory was tested experimentally in 1953 by the American scientist Stanley Miller. Miller created a model of the primordial world consisting of 2 flasks and glass tubes. One flask contained a solution whose composition theoretically corresponded to seawater. He filled the space above the liquid with a mixture of gases that, again, theoretically, corresponded to the supposed atmosphere. This flask was connected by a tube to another flask, which had 2 electrodes to create a spark, a miniature model of lightning. From this spark chamber, another tube led back to the first flask through a condenser and a U-shaped collector. When Miller heated the mixture in the lower flask, it boiled, turned into gas, entered the spark chamber, and then condensed and flowed back into the lower flask. The process was maintained continuously for a week, after which the liquid was pumped out for analysis. The results were positive. The resulting mixture contained 3 amino acids, the compounds from which proteins are formed. Many researchers took up this idea, conducted similar experiments, and obtained even more amino acids and even simple nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA. Convincing results. The results of these experiments are considered convincing and give reason to believe that all protein, and not only it, could have been synthesized over several billion years. Presumably, even DNA with its thousands of strictly arranged atoms could have been created. Once it arose, it could reproduce itself, create its own proteins and other complex organic substances, and develop into a functioning, self-replicating life form, such as a bacterial cell. Something like this could have happened, but the mathematical probability of creating such a complex substance as a protein or DNA as a result of a random combination of chemical elements in a primordial soup is infinitely small. The probability can be illustrated by the example of a monkey with a typewriter. If a monkey is given enough paper and allowed to type randomly for several years, it may reproduce some words, but the probability of it creating a literary masterpiece is practically 0. An amino acid can be compared to a word, but DNA is undoubtedly a masterpiece. This theory is now accepted by many scientists who continue to search for a mechanism that would facilitate the joining of amino acids, like those obtained in Miller's laboratory, into proteins without guidance from DNA. If such a mechanism is found, we will take an important step towards understanding the mystery of DNA formation and, consequently, the origin of life.
Did you know that the building blocks of life could have come from space? In 1969, the Murchison meteorite fell in Australia, in which scientists discovered more than 90 different amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. This confirms that complex organic molecules can form in space and be delivered to the early Earth. The oxygen we breathe was once the cause of the greatest ecological catastrophe. Ancient cyanobacteria, the same ones that formed stromatolites, began to produce oxygen as a waste product. For most organisms of that time, it was a deadly poison, which led to the first mass extinction in the planet's history.
Before the advent of DNA on Earth, an RNA world may have reigned. Scientists believe that the first life forms used not DNA, but its sister, RNA. The reason is that RNA is uniquely capable of both storing genetic information, like DNA, and managing chemical reactions itself, like protein enzymes, solving the chicken and egg problem. The chicken and egg problem in the origin of life looks like this. DNA, or the egg, stores the information, blueprints, to create proteins. Proteins, or the chicken, do all the work in the cell, including building and copying DNA. This creates a vicious circle. To create proteins, you need DNA, and to create DNA, you need proteins. So what came first? How RNA solves this problem? RNA is an all-in-one tool that can do both jobs at once. 1. Store information like DNA. RNA is capable of carrying a genetic code, thus acting as a blueprint. 2. Do the work like proteins. RNA can catalyze, speed up chemical reactions, itself, working as an enzyme. Therefore, the first life form did not need to have both DNA and proteins at the same time. It was sufficient for it to have only RNA, which was both the blueprint, egg, and the builder, chicken. This is the solution to the paradox. You have a common ancestor with a bacterium, fungus, and a blue whale? Scientists call it LUCA, last universal common ancestor. By analyzing the genes of all living things, they have concluded that LUCA was a single-celled organism that lived in hot, oxygen-free water, probably near underwater volcanic vents about 4 billion years ago. The cradle of life might not have been a primordial soup on the surface, but boiling underwater volcanoes? According to one of the leading hypotheses, life originated at black smokers on the ocean floor. These hydrothermal vents provided ideal conditions, a constant supply of energy, a rich chemical composition, and protection from the deadly ultraviolet radiation on the surface of the young Earth. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and see you soon.